My turn. Let me tell you, folks, this has been a long journey for me. Certainly far harder for Jerry. But Jerry's my good friend, and to see what's happened to him is gut-wrenching. I'm here today to tell you the Jerry Delemus story. You know, a lot of people think they know what really happened, and a lot of you out there probably don't know Jerry very well, and you're maybe a little confused as to what has happened with Jerry. I talked to a reporter earlier today. She didn't know. So I'm going to bring us back to the day that Jerry, through social media, found that Cliven Bundy and his family were being terrorized by the BLM. Jerry went through and checked the details and found that what was happening there was egregious. And what was happening there was this. There were some 51 ranchers in Nevada, cattle ranchers. It's their living, feeding this country. That land, the grazing land that the BLM took control of in the mid-40s, turns out became far more valuable than most of the ranchers probably even knew, because I don't think they understood what was happening to them. But what happened was the orders came down from high that the federal government wanted ownership of that land. And in the past few decades, they wound up taking pretty much of those ranches by manipulating grazing rights, by manipulating where the cows could actually receive water, by moving the desert tortoise around and saying, well, now you can't graze your cattle there. They're endangered species, so they may trample on the desert. I mean, the desert tortoise have been there forever, and the cattle have pretty much been there forever. They always get along. Can't imagine a cow not figuring out that it's a tortoise. But they use any and all excuses to eliminate these ranchers. Cliven Bundy was the last man standing, pretty much. And they tried so hard to get him off his land so they could buy the property for pennies on the dollar and take it over. Cliven Bundy owned that land, not him, but his family, from the 1850s, multi-generational. And he wasn't about to give it up. And he shouldn't have been about to give it up. He had reached wit's end. He had fought the government tooth and nail for as long as he could. It's very difficult to fight the government when the federal government is coming after you with a federal agency, and the federal agency charges you with these things they just make up. And then those charges go into a federal court, and you're standing in front of a federal judge being prosecuted by a federal prosecutor, and even if you don't have the money and you have to have a court-appointed attorney, the pockets that the money comes from to pay that attorney is federal money. The deck is stacked, folks. It's stacked. You're not going to win. Cliven Bundy put the word out. I need help. I need supporters. I need people from across this country to rally to us and make a stand. Because what the BLM decided to do was take his cattle. They were rounding them up, shooting them, burning them, and burying them in mass graves. They were ripping up all of the water infrastructure that Cliven Bundy, at his cost, had installed throughout the plains areas for the cows and the cattle. That's what they were doing. So initially some protesters and supporters of Bundy showed up, and they tried to stick him in a First Amendment roped off area in the middle of no freaking place. Imagine that. Your First Amendment's only good if it's in the roped off area. The funny thing was that nobody went there. You know, it was a joke, but they were serious about it. People started to realize that something untoward was going on. Dump trucks were out on the plains area. They saw trucks going out there. They saw backhoes going out there. And it was very suspicious. You maybe have seen one of the videos where a dump truck was coming out, And one of the Bundy brothers, I think it was David, but he was trying to see what was in the truck, because he pretty much knew what was in the truck, dead cattle. They wouldn't let him, and it got a little rough. They took one of the women, they threw her on the ground. I believe she was pregnant. He got beat up. They didn't do anything wrong, but the BLM did. That was long before Jerry got there. Jerry called Cliven Bundy, Jerry being who he is, and he had a conversation with him. And at the end of the conversation, Jerry said, "Man, this man needs help, and we got to go." So Jerry, very next day, I mean, there wasn't any more thought to it than that, and the very next day, him and several others from New Hampshire went. And they drove all the way through. I think it was a 41 or 42-hour ride to get there. Jerry didn't get there before the big showdown they had in the draw. He got there a day after. A lot of the charges they charged Jerry with actually were pointed at that particular incident. He wasn't even there. They're just throwing stuff up against the wall at all these guys. So Jerry got to the Bundy Ranch, and he realized there were a lot of different people there, a lot of folks. And you had different factions, different organizations, and so forth. Long story short, Jerry decided that maybe it'd be better to have this under control and to make sure nothing bad happened. And Jerry, being a sergeant in the Marine Corps, he basically volunteered to do it. He did a hell of a job. He got everything organized. He made sure that everybody understood the reason they were there. They weren't there to cause problems. They weren't there to shoot anybody. That wasn't an issue. It was never going to be an issue unless the Bundy family was attacked, which they weren't. And he made it clear to Cliven Bundy that if they came with a warrant for his arrest, then that's what's going to have to happen. And Cliven agreed, yes, I will go. I am not going to fight a warrant. That didn't happen either. But Jerry came and went from the ranch many times. He went to visit the sheriff, who refused to see him. It wasn't like what people made it out to be, and the mainstream media made it out to be this huge armed standoff. That wasn't what it was at all. And yes, there were a lot of people, snipers, BLM snipers, other agents that were up. They were up in the mountains training their rifles on these guys that were there. They did that. Our guys didn't do that. So a couple of weeks goes by, and Jerry decides, well, it's about time to come home. Everything seems to be peaceable. Didn't seem to be much more that they could do there. So Jerry and the rest of the men came home. As far as he was concerned, and the rest of them were concerned, that was the end of it. There was no violence. Nobody got hurt. There was 0 victims. No, other than the people that got roughed up by the BLM. And it was, I don't know, roughly a year after he got back, maybe a little less, he got a call from the FBI. They wanted to meet with him. Yeah, Jerry being Jerry, he's a very trustworthy guy. If you know Jerry, he had no reason to worry about this. I did. You know, I felt that this wasn't a good thing. But he went, he had his meeting, he still felt they're just doing their job. Months later, they called him a second time. Jerry went for that meeting too. Again, thinking they're just doing this, it's their job. And then a call came, and this is, I'm going to get to Oregon before we get to the last call. The incident in Oregon, which occurred because the Hammond family, Hammond, Hammond family, they owned a ranch. Young family with the grandfather lived there, and they owned a ranch as well, and they owned it since the mid-60s. And again, BLM was coercing them and trying to run them off that ranch. They wouldn't leave. And they had, again, I'm shortening the story, but they had asked permission, got a permit to do a backfire to stop a fire coming their way. It did work, saved property. And then they had a control burn that they also had requested a permit for, which they got. That one went a little further than they originally wanted it to go. And you know what they did? They, being the BLM, charged them with arson. They charged them with arson, and then they charged them as domestic terrorists for lighting 2 fires that they had permission to light, one a backfire and one a controlled burn. The grandfather and the son, that's who they charged. They go to court, they're found guilty. They got sentenced to prison. One served a year, the younger one, and the father, the older man, served 4 or 5 months. And then they let him out. They thought they had done, served their time. Then Obama appointed another judge. Had that judge, the second judge, relook at the sentencing. The second judge, knowing full well had orders to do what I'm about to tell you, said, whoops, the minimum sentence for domestic terrorism is 5 years in prison. Come on back. You all got to serve 5 years, both of you. They're there now, serving their time. When the Bundy family heard about this travesty, they decided this is still their fight. They decided that this is just so unjust that we have to go and stand with this family. The Hammond family really didn't want them to do that. But the Bundys, that's how they are. They just said, no, we can't let this stand. And so they went to Oregon to protest and support the Hammond family. They took over the Mare Refuge. You may have heard about this. And people said it was an armed... No. They went there. They had the keys. They went in. They used it, came back and forth multiple times, all the time. They had a PowerPoint presentation they gave to people explaining the Constitution. And what people really don't understand, and I don't think many of you understand, and that is this. In the Constitution, it's specific. The federal government cannot own any more than 2% of the land mass of this country. And that includes land to be used for forts, ports, and of course the 10 square miles of Washington, D.C. Forts and ports being military bases and deep water ports for the Navy. That's it. All you got to do is look at a map, particularly out west. The federal government owns some of the land in New Hampshire, but if you look at that map, you'll see how much land the federal government owns. Thank God for Donald Trump. Donald Trump has already made the decision that that land is going to go back to the states that it belongs to. But Jerry went out there. He didn't necessarily agree that they should have went into the refuge, but he wanted to talk to them because he knew them. And he figured, hey, look, maybe I can talk them out and just end this thing peacefully, and that'll be the end of it. He went all the way out there on his dime. They wouldn't let him see him. Well, Jerry came back. He told the FBI he was going. He talked to the FBI out there. Jerry was saddened by the fact that he couldn't really help much because they wouldn't let him, and he came home. After Jerry came home, you may have heard about what happened with Lavoy Finicum. Lavoy Finicum, salt of the earth, 11 children. He was one of the ranchers out in Nevada. He came to help the Hammond family. And they were on their way to another county to do a PowerPoint town hall presentation in a county that had a friendly sheriff who believed in these guys. And they were ambushed by the FBI and Oregon State Police. Lavoy Finicum got out of the car, from the car, very deep snow, and they just riddled him. They shot him 6 or 7 times. And then they trained their guns on the vehicle, shot at the vehicle trying to kill the people in it.
Croc TV.